I think I went overboard because then I was staying up till 4 in the morning doing stuff, and then so now I'm like, okay, let me try to do 1 to 2 things a week, and that's
Yeah.
good. Who would you tell people Mike Drucker is? Because I know
hmm
you've been all over the place, mostly comedy and writing, but
Yeah. Um, who is Mike Drucker? Um, he is a comedian and writer for television, books, and video games. I've written for Nintendo, Valve, The Tonight Show, and I have a new book out now called Good Game No Rematch, which is about basically a comedy book about growing up with video games.
yeah. And you're also an Emmy nominated writer.
That's true. Also Emmy nominated,
Yeah,
WGA award winning.
you gotta keep that on in there.
I got a bowling trophy when I was a little kid
Oh, that's
for
cool.
third place. Third place.
um, and then so you started in South Florida, but you went to New York for college to
That's
go to
right. Yeah.
NYU, and then you kind of stayed there mostly.
Yeah. I went to NYU for college, and then I stuck around an extra year to get my master's in English literature, kind of because I wasn't entirely sure what I was doing with
Hmm.
myself. And I loved books. So at the very least, I know I was like, I can do more books. Um, but yeah, I started in Florida and kind of wanted to go somewhere that was like a big city. It wasn't even like I want to get away from my parents. It was more just like I kind of want to be a place where there's like subways and things to do.
Stuff happening.
Yeah, like this where I grew up is very nice, but it's that thing where like you hang out with your parents and by like the third day, your mom's like, "Do you want to go to Target again?" And it's like, "No,
Yeah.
I don't. I don't. Let's. Is there anything else?" So I moved to New York and I started doing comedy. I started interning for stuff like Saturday Night Live, where I also got to be a Weekend Update freelancer, which was very cool. I got to write jokes for Weekend Update occasionally. And, I did stuff like The Onion and McSweeney's and stand up in New York. And eventually I got a job offer to go to Nintendo of America. So I went to Seattle, worked for Nintendo of America for a few years, then did comedy for IGN for a year, made comedy videos for them, which was fun to just have to do comedy videos while everyone else had real jobs.
Yeah.
And then I went to the Tonight Show. Well, it was Late Night with Jimmy Fallon then, but then became the Tonight Show while I was there. And then since then, I've bounced around a little bit.
Hmm. What year were you in the tonight or late night? I guess what years was that?
I was at. I've done two runs at Fallon, so I was at Late Night and Tonight Show from 2013 to 2016, and then I was back there from 2022 to 2024, and then
Okay.
I left again to focus on this book that I hope you folks will buy.
Yeah. No, because I was so I lived in New York for internships when I was at the Miami Ad School, but before that I went to visit my friend and we went to Jimmy Fallon to late night, but we were on Models and Buckets where they just dump a bunch of shit on you.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
That was a good
Yeah.
time too.
That was fun. Oh, yeah, but then so you wrote two other books. You wrote the Silent Hill book for Silent Hill
Boss fight
2
books.
for Boss Fight, and then
Yep.
Plumbers Don't Wear Ties for Limited Run.
Yeah, I
But that's
did.
like an is that like a novelization of the game, kind of your own story on it?
Yeah, they came to me for that one. They were like, "Hey, do you want to do something for like?" They were very upfront. They were like, "For like no money, not for free, not literally for free, but like, writing a book is a project." And they were very clear. They were like, "This is going to be something ridiculous, but we think you're the man for it." And they're like, "We want to do a parody novelization of this game that we now own rights for because they bought out the rights for that. Plumbers Don't Wear
Oh
Ties. So
yeah.
Limited Run Games actually owns that IP entirely." And so they were like, "We'd like you to write a novelization that makes fun of it." And, I decided to base it on those old Worlds of Power books from when I was a little kid. There was like a series of books about NES games called Worlds of Power, and they
Mhm.
were novelizations of old Nintendo games. But they were clearly novelizations by people who had not played them. And so they were always like very weird. Like there's a Metal Gear one from the very first Metal Gear. And
Wow.
when I say it's not canon, it is like an entirely different idea of what Metal Gear is as a game in book form. And so that's what I kind of wanted to do. I wanted to write something that was almost like because Plumbers Don't Wear Ties is a bad game, and I wanted to write something if like a very dumb writer was writing a novelization of a very bad game.
That's fun. I think I had a Mario is Missing like Choose Your Own Adventure
Yeah,
book from the Scholastic book fairs. Like I'd always pick up books that were like, "Oh, I love this game," and I never read them.
I
So I
love
probably
those.
picked up some of those.
Yeah.
Mhm. But this book's cool because the new book, Good Game No Rematch, is cool because it's just like your own little essays
Yeah.
on each, and then there's like sprinkled in chapters that are kind of like the fake ads in SNL and stuff, kind of like
Yeah.
little skits or sketches.
Yeah. Little interstitial
Yeah,
pieces.
which are fun. But I like that it blends all kinds of like there are like really emotional and heartfelt chapters. There's like silly stuff, and it's all kinds
Yeah.
of things.
When I was writing it and when we were like going through the editing process, we really wanted to, we wanted it to be super funny, but we also wanted there to be like different kinds of funny, and
Mhm.
we didn't want it to just be like the same joke over and over and over again. So we really worked hard, with the interstitial comedy bits to like give a breathing moment between a story where it's just a joke thing, and then like putting a joke thing right before a really emotional chapter, just so it's like it's not like you're just getting pummeled in the stomach.
Yeah, well, there was the good one with the Street Fighter one with your dad that
Yeah.
it even ends on a funny joke that your dad's like, I don't remember that. Like
I don't
it's this
remember that
really
at
nice
all.
story. So I don't remember
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. For those of you listening, I start the story by saying I had an argument with my dad where he said a very parent thing, which is like, you only remember the bad things I've done. You never talk about the good things. And then I have a very heartfelt story, which is true. And I tell it in the book. And I like did in this situation. This was just a couple years ago as adults. I was like, no, I remember this thing that was great. And I went through the story with him. And it basically involved us getting robbed and him doing something really great that he did not
Yeah.
have to do at the time when we had no money. And he was like, I didn't do that. And I was like, no, you definitely did. Cause like, I even asked, I made sure my sister could confirm it. My sister was like, yeah, that definitely happened. And he's like, oh, I don't remember that at all.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
I think a lot of the chapters they made me think of things like stories from my own life, whether it's
Yeah.
because I'm also in South Florida or just like something relating to that game. But even I think last week I was writing an article on Madden 25 after like I hadn't played it in like 5 years and I got a code just because the season's over. So they're like, sure, you could have a code for
Yeah.
this.
Why not?
And I was like, okay, I'm gonna revisit it 5 years later. And then I read your chapter, the Good Game No Rematch chapter, which is also about like a football game.
Mhm.
And it made me think of like it's like old things. Like when I was in college, I'd play and my roommate would be there and he'd be
Yeah.
like, don't mess this up. And I'd mess up and lose the game in the last play. He'd be like, kneel it. And I'd be like, no, that's the loser's way to win. So I'd go for a big bomb, get one more touchdown, lose the game, and then
Yeah.
I'd turn off the game all mad. But I included that in the thing because of that and like other like stories like that.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's the books help me think more about my own writing because I know
Thank
I
you.
can't be just like I'm not one of the big I'm just one person, so I can't review every game like in depth. So I was like,
Yeah.
let me find how this game makes me feel, or
Yeah.
maybe it's a story about life that has to do with it, but just different ways to look at things.
And that's kind of what I wanted out of this book because there's like a ton of great books that are the history of games. There's a ton of
Hmm.
great books, about that are like the bitmap books that are these amazing coffee table books where you can see like all of the Metal Slug pixel graphics. Like
Hmm.
those are all for me, but like I've seen books like Patton Oswalt's Silver Screen Fiend, and there's lots of books about music where people talk about how different art forms not just change their lives or inspire them, but literally go like, the reason I was thinking this way was because I watched this movie.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of that about games, especially in terms of like a positive, happy way. Like,
Hmm.
and so I really wanted something that like portrayed, not just that games are important to us, but literally the way that we think, and perceive the world can be influenced by them in both a good way and a silly way, not just a
Hmm.
way that's on the news when someone's scared.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you about writing the book too. Like, was it
Mm-hmm.
coming up with a bunch of stories or thinking of games and then stories that relate to them?
Um, I um, I kind of like went from both angles on it. I had
Hmm.
like a couple stories that I was like I knew I was going to tell. Like the one with my dad that we just talked about. I knew that was going to be in there. I knew the Dance Dance Revolution story was going to be in there,
Hmm.
and I had a couple games in mind that I wanted to talk about. So I like made a list, and eventually over time. I remembered more stories I wanted to tell, or there was one or two things that I cut because I was like, oh, this isn't really. There was one or two personal stories that just weren't really attached to games that I couldn't shoehorn it in, and I
Hmm.
was like, let's stop trying to make this happen. Um, so over time, it kind of evolved, and it nothing was like it wasn't like I want to write a Final Fantasy chapter, and therefore I'm going to write this thing
Yeah.
about my teacher. It
Hmm.
was more along the lines of like, okay, like Final Fantasy VII, what comes to mind? Okay, this teacher I had, let's go. And the same thing goes for things like, when I was trying to think of something later on, I wasn't originally, I write a chapter about a friend of mine who passed.
Hmm.
And I wasn't really thinking that, but like as I was, you know, writing this book and looking at modern games, I kind of like remembered how this had affected me. And so like that was kind of my more modern games thing with Final Fantasy VII Remake. And it was really kind of both thinking about games I wanted to talk about, but also looking back at my life and actually being like, what are the crazy stories? Like what are the weird moments? Like, and some of them I had to confirm, like the Power Glove. Like I had to be
Yeah.
like, we all went insane that this didn't work, right? Like we
Hmm.
all nearly became feral because this thing didn't work, right? I wasn't just a young boy. And I really like learned a lot about myself doing it, and I kind of learned more about games doing it just because I was really like thinking about how they influenced me.
Yeah. And then when you're like, I guess you can write kind of like a summary of the story first, but when you're actually like, okay, this is going in the book, is there a lot of Googling and making sure that the year is right or stuff or
Yeah,
things like
and I'm
that?
sure there's still mistakes in there, but
Hmm.
there's a lot of it. And I think literally every pass, when I'd get notes back from the editors, I would check things, and occasionally like there were, you know, I think at one point I wasn't even thinking, and I wrote Dragon's Lair instead of Dragon's Quest.
Hmm.
And if I had not fixed that, I would have sounded insane. Um, you know, and it was like it was a typo, and I missed it a couple times on revisions just because like you see the word Dragon's Lair and
Yeah, and
Dragon's
you take
Quest,
it.
and you're kind of like those are both game titles.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until like the third revision that I was like, oh my god, we need to. And it was a minor mistake, but it was one of those mistakes where like you imagine everyone screenshotting that one mistake and being like, oh really, you
Yeah.
like games, do you?
And then what's it like working with like a publisher, editor, and like this whole team when you're writing a book versus if you were just gonna sit down and be like, I'm gonna write this book.
Well, it was interesting because this was my first book with a major publisher.
Hmm.
Boss Fight Books, the
Oh
guy
yeah.
who owns the company is also the editor. And with limited run games, my editors were the other, like Jeremy Parrish, who's also writing books for them.
Hmm.
Um, so, with those, they were sort of simpler in that I just, I would send something in, and they were also shorter. So I
Yeah.
would send something in and I'd get notes back. But since I knew these people kind of personally, it was a little more of an informal process. Um, and this was more like I had a team. I had two editors and a PR person, and a legal team because they also and I'm getting ahead of myself, but not only do you get edit notes, but you also get legal notes where it's like, hey, could you change these names? Or, you know, when I mention a fact, like when I mention, for
Oh
example,
yeah.
when I talked about ET the Extraterrestrial for Atari, we all know that it did bad. It's common knowledge that it did bad. But their legal team was like, is this story about the garbage dump true or is this a joke? Because if it's not true, we're worried that it's like defamation. And I was like, no,
Oh.
it's true. Here's the proof of this.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that they didn't care or anything. It's just like, as the legal
Yeah,
team,
we have to cover our asses.
yeah. So a lot of names got changed because they were like, just do us this favor. The only names I wouldn't change were things like people who were public figures, like Nate Bildorf at Nintendo, or like
Hmm.
Ann Lin, who was in the credits of Kid Icarus. So it's like
Hmm.
I was like, I'm not going to change the names of people who are real life people that readers would know.
Yeah. I just thought of something from that, but oh yeah, I talked to Cliff Blazinski when his book came out, but I feel he was like open about talking about he worked with a ghostwriter, but I feel like after talking to him about it, it's kind of like just an editor, but more helpful, I guess, or more on your ass, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, like I just straight up had an editor, but
Hmm.
some people like do have like, you know, um, I have friends who are more like political journalists, and they've been ghostwriters in books, but sort of in the sense where they've almost been like co-authors. They're just not credited. So it's not
Hmm.
like, it's not always the old story of like a celebrity, handing you
Yeah.
the keys and you just making a book and then handing it back to them. Although that does happen.
Hmm.
Um, but no, this was like, in fact, for some of this, like some of the notes from the editor were like, "Is this true? I don't remember that." Like the editor, both editors were games fans, but they weren't like so hardcore that they would get every reference. So like even for them, they were learning things as they went through the book.
Hmm. And I guess putting everything in order, was it like kind of like an artist choosing their album, the
Yeah,
songs in order because you have all the stories now? I mean, it kind of went in order of your life, I guess. Like
yeah.
started with childhood and stuff, but
Towards adulthood, when we were around like Nintendo and the D&D chapters, it's like some of this is
yeah, then it
happening
might have
all at the
jumped.
same time. Um, but yeah, I kind of knew I wanted to do it in order of my life. But you know, like you said, like there were games I wanted to talk about that I just didn't have space for, or like you know, I probably have enough not cut finished material, but cut rough material where if this did well, I could do like an expanded edition.
Hmm.
You know, if they were like, "We love this. Can you give us 4 more chapters?" I'd be like, "Definitely." Um, so it was tough because you know there are stories I really like that just weren't as funny, or I just wasn't clicking with it as much, or interstitial bits that just weren't quite working. Um, the interstitials were a bit harder because like you have to keep them small. They were my
Hmm.
idea. This wasn't the publisher asking me.
Yeah.
I just knew I wanted them, but it's you know they're harder because you have to like just hit a joke and get out.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it was tough deciding what went in. It was tough deciding what got cut, but it was still fun.
Yeah. And then there was the chapter on the solo pen and paper adventures, which is something I don't really know about, but I'm gonna research it more and look it up because even like I play a lot of board games with friends and stuff,
Yeah,
but even if I'm gonna bring a new board game to the group, I'm like, oh, I have to like learn the rules, so I'll set it up and try to like basically play it by yourself.
yeah.
Try to learn the rules and not look like a fool in front of everyone.
I do that all the time, man. I do that all the time. If you're looking for a good solo board game, Final Girl is really good.
Oh, my friend has that one.
And if you're looking for a good solo RPG, because I do like, there's a chapter about playing solo pen and paper RPGs, and the thing is, in the chapter, I do make fun of them, but
Yeah.
the other thing is, I have like
Yeah,
a
you love
shelf
them.
full of them. I buy so many in indie board game shops. I buy so many off Drive Through RPG and games like Skeletons or Thousand Year Vampire. But it's also a ridiculous practice to be like sitting at a journal at a table by yourself, being like, "Oh, what do I do next? Aha! I see what
Yeah.
I do now." But while you're doing it, if you get into it, you're like you start to build a crazy interesting story. It's
Mhm.
just there's once in a while when you're like, "What am I doing here?"
Yeah. I don't know if that it was that chapter, another chapter that you talked about. Uh, it's like something about reading in the tub by candlelight. But you mentioned that, and then
Oh, I
that
do. I
yeah,
forget which chapter that is.
and at that point, I was actually that was like the only part of the book that I was taking a bath and reading. I was like, this is so weird.
I totally got you, man. I
Yeah.
got you.
And then at the end, you talk about the pandemic and like building your own arcade with, I guess, all these machines behind
All
you
these
and
machines
stuff,
you
and the
see behind
projectors and
me.
stuff. But last week for my birthday, we had my girlfriend always, or fiance now, we always do she'll do like a kids party theme pretty much, so like Star Wars or something. And then this
Yeah,
year she let me be a part of it, and I was like, I'm going to do Nintendo because it's like the end of the Switch, so I'm going to do a Nintendo party,
that's
so we have
nice.
Mario and stuff.
Yeah,
And then I read that chapter and I was thinking about we have a little projector that we got during the pandemic, but I was like, oh, maybe I could set up the old Nintendo or
yeah,
something like that, but I never did it just because I didn't have time. But I was like, that'd be fun to do for a party one day, just have like different stations and stuff because we could do it with everything we
it's
have now.
super fun. It's super fun to do. It's super fun. Yeah, during the pandemic, I just got so trapped in my own head that I
Hmm.
literally moved furniture and rebuilt an arcade using toys and arcade joysticks and mini arcade machines. Um, and it was actually like maybe the most mental health saving moment of that like first 6 months that I had.
Yeah.
Um, but again, that's why it's in the book is sort of like, you know, here's the situation that everyone is going through and everyone just feels like terrified and scared. And it's another example of like, you know, and games got me through with like Animal Crossing and playing games with
Yeah.
my brother and my friends and stuff. But like, it was really like sort of like just reliving the arcade experience that I was like, okay, I'm fine. The world will never be okay, but I'm right now okay.
Hmm. No, that's something I was jealous of that I never had like an arcade growing up.
Yeah,
Like we had
exactly.
arcade games in bowling alleys or maybe movie theaters sometimes, little things, but I never had like a cool arcade. And now I think there's one here in Miami called Arcade Odyssey that
Oh,
has a bunch of old games that I want to go check out one day, but I always felt jealous of people that like grew up going to the arcade and playing all these games there.
yeah. Yeah, we were lucky we had some good ones near me.
Mhm.
Or at least they seemed good when I was a child. I'm sure if I
Yeah.
went back now, I'd be like, this is like the size of a studio apartment.
Yeah. Oh, oh yeah, I want to say that well we talked about your all your jobs before, but you basically had like all my dream jobs at some point. Like I always
Thank
wanted to
you.
be a writer for SNL or Jimmy Fallon. I want to work for IGN or do something. And of course, everyone that's a gamer wants to work for Nintendo.
Yeah, I got very lucky. I got very lucky, although that also meant like leaving behind a lot of dream jobs.
Yeah, but when you talked about the Nintendo chapter and what you did there, like with localization, it's something that you hear the word and you're like, oh, that's just like translating. Like even with my
Yeah.
copywriting freelance work, I translate stuff from Spanish to English a lot, but it's
Hmm.
also you're still kind of I didn't think of it this way until I read the chapter, but you're still finding what's the meaning behind this? Like you do the simple
Yeah.
translation, find the meaning, and then how do I translate the meaning, not just the words? Like make it
Exactly.
for a different audience even.
Yeah. I mean, because, there's like, I say it in the book, but there's like, I'm sure like little turns of phrase that would make zero sense if you directly translated them.
Hmm.
If you just did like a Google Translate on, it'd just be like, why are you? I mean, that would if that would happen like when my translator was out, because in localization I was the English language writer and I worked with a Japanese translator who was like my partner,
Hmm.
and we were in the same office, and then we'd communicate with NCL, which is Nintendo of Japan. Um, where was I going? I forgot. I lost my train of thought.
That you can Google Translate
Oh
it, and
yeah,
then
that you can Google Translate, and we'd get these
but you
emails
get
from
some
Japan.
weird things.
Yeah, well, like there's essentially a phrase in Japanese that I didn't know until I saw it because my translator was out, so I had to use Google Translate to translate an email. And it's basically like if they've noticed you're working hard, it'll be essentially the equivalent of like, "Hey, I notice how tired you are." And seeing an email that starts with "You look tired" from
Yeah.
like Sakurai is weird. And like I was like, what does this mean? Because I knew like and one of the translators was like, it's a phrase that basically means thank you for working hard.
Hmm.
But just again, directly translated into English, it almost is like,
Yeah.
whew, you look tired. Anyway, here's something coming up.
Yeah. No, I always think how like some people are like, oh, my parents like curse a bunch. I'm like, I don't think my parents cursed a lot growing up, but they then I realized they did in Spanish when you translate the meaning of what they're saying. Like you didn't think it was a bad word because your parents were saying it, so you're like, oh, it's just a phrase. But you're like, no, they were saying like you're a shit eater, or you're this or that. And then at Jimmy Fallon, was it like a writing room? I guess for is it like is it split like this is the monologue writers and then people coming up with ideas for sketches and maybe games and other stuff, or is it kind of everyone's all together just doing everything?
It's sort of like you have a specialty, but you will still do one or the other. So like
Mhm.
if so monologue writers would still be, and I have been both sketch and monologue at that show at different points. Um, just because I've worked on that show a couple times, and I'm, at when I have gone back or was there would be a bit more senior, so sometimes I'd be like assigned to different spots. Um, Everyone would pitch stuff, and if the monologue was in bad shape, like let's say some giant news event happened at 4:30 and we were going to tape
Mhm.
at 5, then like it'd be like everybody start writing jokes. So it's not like you're siloed off because you're not at all. And when we
Mhm.
do have meetings that are like in-person pitch meetings, like sometimes it'd be like, hey, we're going to stay until 7 p.m. and we're just going to spend an hour after the show pitching. Everyone would be in the same room together, but generally you do have monologue and sketch a bit separate. But again, sketch is working on games, working on sketches. Monologue is working on both the jokes themselves, but sometimes a lot of the in monologue sketches that are more like mini sketches.
Mhm.
um, it's a very busy environment. So it's not like 30 Rock where everyone's just sitting around a table bouncing off ideas. That's a little more like a sitcom room, because a
Mhm.
sitcom room you're often like hammering out a script and punching it up and adding jokes or replacing jokes. For a late night show, it's a little more like you might meet in the morning to discuss ideas, but then you're kind of all off to the races because you have to finish the material by, again, like 5 p.m.
Yeah.
So it's a little more of, it is a grind, but it's also like a very like, all right, and go.
Hmm. Yeah, I was gonna ask I guess what's more hectic, being in the SNL writing team, which is a show that happens live but once a week, or being in a late night show that's every day, but it's pre-taped, but it's still like
Yeah.
every day it starts over.
Well, and I was only a freelancer for SNL, so I
Oh
was
yeah.
never on staff, but I think probably being an SNL staffer is a little tougher.
Hmm.
And that is because unlike like something like Samantha Bee, which I also wrote on, was once a week as well, but
Oh yeah.
that was a different environment. SNL, they're doing 90 minutes of content in 1 week, and the writing schedule they've had since the 70s is insane.
Hmm.
When I was freelancing, especially when I wasn't interning there or working there as an assistant, it was a lot more like I would just send my jokes and then hope for the best. But they're late hours. They're, you know, some of them will like sleep at the office overnight if they have to. They'll like have like a little like almost toiletry kit with them.
Hmm.
So, and it's super competitive, plus it seems like these seasons are long, but SNL only has 20 episodes, which is a lot for a show. But if you're a writer in like a writing room of 20 people, you really need to work hard to make sure that you have something in those 20 shows.
Yeah.
And there's always people at the door behind you, so you really got to work hard. And that's also true with the Tonight Show. But when you have 4 or 5 chances a week to get stuff on versus one, you just get more at bats.
Hmm. And do you have any, I guess, jokes from that made it onto Weekend Update from your freelance, or any sketches from Jimmy Fallon that you're like really proud of or really
um,
happy they
God,
made it?
absolutely. I'm trying to think of. Well, there was a Fallon. My favorite thing I ever wrote for Fallon was one of two things. One, there was a news story, and this was years and years ago, but apparently some French magazine had said Leonardo DiCaprio had got some woman pregnant, and it
Hmm.
wasn't true. And he sued the French magazine for defamation or libel or whatever, and he won. But what really struck me reading that news article was that the award was $9,000.
Wow.
And what struck me
Hmm.
about that was $9,000 is the perfect amount of money that is a ton of money for like me or you,
Hmm.
and nothing to him.
Nothing to him.
And so I wrote this bit where it was almost like a statement. Like Jimmy was reading it out, but he wasn't doing an impression. It was like he released this statement. And the statement was essentially with a picture of Leonardo DiCaprio next to it was like, I hope this lawsuit's not about the money. It's about showing that the press can't just make up lies about us. And, you know, we hope that this shows that it's important to tell the truth. And then like the next slide was, and also guess who got $9,000? And it was like him listing what he was going to do. Like he was going to buy a new couch and a big TV.
That's fun.
And like he was going to invite a bunch of girls over. Like, it was just super fun because like, again, it was like a lawsuit with like a major celebrity. Then you're like, wait, $9,000? What's he going to do
Yeah.
with that? I really love that. I also wrote this sketch that they did again later, but it was called. It was originally with Ryan Reynolds called "That's What I Respect About You" or "What I Respect About You," and the premise is kind of, it's like you're at a bar and you're hanging out with someone, and you like when a friend says something nice, but it's kind of insulting in a weird way. When someone's like, what I respect about you, you just don't really care that much. You
Yeah.
just like hang back and let it happen, and you're like, oh. And so I just wrote a sketch where they were insulting each other back and forth. And also, Jimmy doesn't always like being mean.
Yeah.
He likes, he likes being nice on camera. He likes thinking of the show as sort of like this comforting thing for people to, put on at night after a long day. And so part of the creation of that was me being like, how do I get him to be mean? Like, and not trick him into it, not like trick the man
Yeah.
himself into it, but what is a in-sketch mechanism that I can turn him to be mean? And I was like, oh, backhanded compliments of being like, what I really like about you? You're always doing this. And it was super fun. So I was very proud of that. And for SNL, I'm trying to think. Oh, my favorite joke I ever got on was, and I forget his name, but it was like the inventor of the trampoline died this week at the age of 97. His family will always remember his last words. Look what I can do. And so I was very proud of that when I wrote it. I was very proud when it got in the show. I was very
Yeah.
proud when I got some money. But that was probably my favorite Weekend Update joke I wrote.
That's cool. And would you find out, I guess, when Weekend Update is happening, like, oh, I wrote that.
Well, when I was working there as an assistant, like Saturdays were still busy because I was when I was an intern. When you're an intern there, you are kind of responsible for like literally running with changes, scheduling changes. If there's like script changes, in those little moments, like those little moments when they're like they cut to a photo, like commercial breaks.
Hmm.
But like even in between sketches, when they're kind of doing something transitional, you'd like rush, give it to someone, a producer, cameraman, and and as an assistant, I was working with the photo and film department. I was a
Hmm.
researcher for them, so we'd be like, changing Weekend Update graphics itself. And so I would have something in dress rehearsal maybe, and I'd be like, okay, don't think about that because I have to do my actual job that I'm paid for here.
Hmm.
And I would be like nervously watching it, and if it didn't do well and I knew it was going to get cut, like my night would be ruined. And if it did well, I'd be like, okay, now I have to wait like an hour to find out if it's still in because they'll still need to cut stuff no matter what. Um, so it was kind of nerve wracking because you're doing a high pressure job in that moment while waiting to see if another high pressure thing goes your way.
Yeah.
When I was freelancing but not working there, because I did that for a couple of years, it was more like I would turn on Weekend Update
Hmm.
usually either that night or the next day, and I'd kind of like just like be like, "Am I gonna see anything?" Because they won't tell you. They won't
Yeah.
tell you because they don't know if it's gonna get cut last
Yeah, they
minute.
don't know.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
it's they're busy too, so it's not like they're gonna be like, "Hey, you better watch the show tonight."
Yeah.
Wink.
I
It's more
gotta
like,
email Mike and this
yeah,
person and that person.
exactly.
Oh, and then I've been watching the Game Changers documentaries on HBO, but I saw you pop up on there. But I feel like I've seen
Yeah,
you on other documentary stuff. I feel like you are also you can call yourself a gaming historian, and I think that
yeah.
comes from you hanging out at Barnes and Noble when you were a kid and was reading all the magazines and stuff.
That's the Barnes and Noble I'm doing. Well, that's kind of the Barnes and Noble I'm doing it at. The Barnes and
They
Noble
moved it.
moved down University Drive, which only you would understand.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and then you wrote. I know you wrote for the Dice Awards, but
Mhm.
you've written for other game awards or just the Dice Awards?
um, just the Dice Awards. I've just written for the Dice Awards, but I have written for the Golden Globes,
Hmm.
the ESPYS, the Sports Emmys, which are not the ESPYS, even though
Oh
people
yeah.
think they're the same thing. Um, yeah, I've written for a bunch of award shows, but Dice I've written for 7 or 8 years now,
Yeah.
just because I knew Greg Miller from
Yeah, because of
IGN.
Greg.
So, but yeah, I love writing for Dice,
And are
and the
you
past 2 years I've been able to go.
oh, so you're in the room and people know that you're the one that wrote the jokes about them?
I mean, they don't know I'm the one who wrote it usually,
Yeah.
but they know it's me. Or there's another writer who I met him when we worked on Mystery Science Theater 3000. A guy
Oh,
named Devin Coleman, who I have as a co-writer.
oh, cool. And I guess what else goes on at the Dice Awards? Because there's the summit too and stuff. So you get to go
There's the
check
summit.
out things.
I go check out things usually. I don't go to as many of the summit things because a lot of that, especially at Dice, is more about like business,
Hmm.
and so which is extremely important, obviously. But like, I'm not really pitching a game. I'm not looking to improve my video game pitch.
Hmm.
Like I don't. I could not create a vertical slice if you had a gun to my head. And so usually with Dice or when I've been to like GDC, it's been a chance to hang out with people that I don't get to see normally. Like that is when I get to like go out drinking with some Nintendo friends
Hmm.
or, hang out with a lot of my video game press friends who I might mostly know from the internet, but see once a year at PAX or again, Dice. So it's a really good chance just to not network, but socialize. Like to be like, oh
Yeah.
man, I haven't seen this person in 8 months, even though I talk to them on, Blue Sky once every other day.
Hmm. Yeah, I've been wanting to go to PAX or one of those because I guess it started during the pandemic when everything was online. I would get the press invite. So
Yeah.
I did GDC online, but now they still invite me. But I'm like, I don't have that much to cover there because it's mostly the technology and stuff, which is really cool and would be cool to see.
Yeah.
But I think
And,
PAX would be the one.
when I do Dice, like, I'm lucky enough that they're flying me up and putting me in a
Yeah,
hotel.
that's cool.
I'd probably feel different if I was paying to go to Las
Yeah.
Vegas.
Well, and then what was it like? So at IGN, I know you were there for Up at Noon and all that. Like
Hmm.
what was it like working with Greg and Brian there, and just because that was probably you guys were just on your own doing your own thing, is what it sounds like.
It kind of was. We were like left to our own devices
Mhm.
until some of the higher ups, usually like more like business people or something, would find out we were making fun of something, and they'd be like, "Oh!" And I'll be clear, we were never censored. There was never like a "you are not allowed to do this." But there was a lot of, "Are you sure you
Yeah.
want to do this?" And like 99% of the time we would do it because none of our ideas were like offensive. It was usually they were just like, but this company likes us.
Yeah.
We're like, we like them too. Um, you know, like, I had just come from Nintendo when I went to IGN to do comedy videos, and the 3DS had just come out and it wasn't doing great. So like, I even like texted Nintendo people like, I know I just worked on 3DS stuff. We're gonna make fun of it a little bit. It has nothing to do with whether or not I like you. I was like, I like this system very much. We're still going to make fun of it right now. Um, but it was good. Greg and Brian were great. It was also, you know, the first time that I had to be a producer. I was also the head
Oh
writer
yeah.
of it, but it was the first time I had to make sure, because other things I was freelancing or I was just a staff writer on. And this, I was like, okay, well, we need a cameraman.
Mhm.
Where are we going to shoot this? Who are we going to shoot it with? Do we have, because there's an office filled with toys, do we have props for this? Or do we actually need to get props?
Mhm.
Um, it really, before I was working in television as a writer who would have to produce sketches, it helped give me training wheels on producing sketches.
Yeah. Well, it's like when I was in ad school doing copywriting, it was all the ideas were the teachers always like big ideas, whatever, because it's all fake and mock-ups and stuff. But then
Yeah,
when you get to a real agency, it's like, oh, that's cool, but the client would never want to pay for this or
right.
have this done. So when you're the one behind it, you want to write something, you're like, well, we're not going to
Yeah.
do that.
Oh, all the time, all the time. When I've written sponsored content for a company, there have been times where I wrote once was hired to write sponsored content for a snack company, and I won't say who,
Mhm.
but like their guidelines were so crazy,
Oh yeah.
and like I was like, do you really need like a style guide that's like 30 pages for this
Hmm.
snack food? And they were
Yeah,
like, yes, we do.
I learned that fresh doesn't mean anything from like different food places because you can say fresh, but you can't say like this or that, or
Yeah,
you can say crisp and words to describe the lettuce, but it's not organic or anything.
yeah. And there'd be things that, by the way, there'd be things too, like it'd be like, make sure that we're not putting like too much of the food in their mouths. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay.
And are you currently working on anything, I
I
guess,
am
like that, or
doing the sports Emmys in May, and until for the next month or so, I'm just going to be doing promotional stuff. I have promotion in New York on April 9th, Coral Springs, Florida, April 18th, and then in Los Angeles, May 5th at a place called Book Soup.
um, yeah, and I was gonna ask you, I guess, about your writing process and stuff more as a comedian, maybe more, but
Sure. So as far as process as writing comedy,
hmm
writing for someone else is different than writing for myself.
yeah.
And writing for someone else, I'll usually, when I say do an impression of them, I don't mean like make fun of them. I'll literally like be talking to myself and gesturing in front of myself and almost composing my body the way I've seen them in videos.
Hmm.
Because occasionally I will get hired to like even for stand-ups. Like I'll have a couple friends who are more famous than me who will be like, I'm doing an event for this company. Can you write some jokes about this company for me? I'll pay you $1,000.
Hmm.
And I'll do that because I like $1,000. But
Yeah.
like I will watch a couple videos of that friend and I'll like again like be like I'll try to mimic how they're talking and then write that way.
Yeah.
So and over time like you sort of just incorporate it. So I don't necessarily need to do an impression of Jimmy to write things that I think Jimmy would say. But it really helped almost get me into the mindset of them rather than
Yeah.
just writing
What you
what
would
Mike
say,
Drucker would
or
say, but make someone else say it.
yeah, or even
Um,
like if you say like, oh, I would use this word, but they would never say that word or something,
yeah,
or things like that.
absolutely. Or this isn't their sense of humor. I'm not gonna be like, but that's funny. It's like that's not what they're paying me for.
Hmm.
um, for myself though, it's a little more like I will, you know, if it's a stand up bit, like sometimes I'll riff something on stage and I'll be like, okay, this is the seed of something, and I'll just write a lot under it in like a Google Doc and kind of edit it and try to almost not do an impression of myself but talk it out, speak it, see how it flows, and cut it and eventually try it on stage and hope that at least a third of it works,
Hmm.
which is kind of the hit rate. Which, but also that was kind of good for the book itself because coming from a stand-up background, I was able to really have fun writing in my own voice.
Yeah.
It was still a lot of work, but it was sort of like it was almost like I was writing stand-up on paper.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I've been doing improv for like 10 years, but got back into stand up last year a little bit just because my friend was like, he was coming to town. He's like, I want to see you do stand up. So I was like, okay, I'll just try doing it again.
Yeah,
But I feel like I do the same well, I always write things in my notes on my phone, and then it's kind of like I'll sit down and try to elaborate on it, write a
yeah.
bunch, but it is going in front of people and trying to find the bits that work. And then sometimes you riff
Oh,
something stupid and you're like, oh, I thought that was dumb, but they actually like that part the best.
yeah. Or you just riff something. You're like, this is better than anything else in this
Yeah.
bit. Why did I just come to it?
Yeah. But what I learned also is that so the first time I did stand up was when I was in the Miami ad school. We had a stand up class for copywriters. It was stand up and improv, but ours was mostly stand up. And
Mm-hmm.
then your final was you get in front of like the graduating class and their parents and do your set for 5 minutes or whatever it was. And it's like you're there with a safety net because they all want you to win. So they're all like laughing and cheering and it's
Yeah,
awesome. And at that point, I think while I was doing it in my head, I'm like, oh, I hope they're laughing. But now, after doing improv for so long, I feel like I don't care if people laugh and I'll just go on. I'm like, I don't care what happens.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
like less nerves, maybe.
I think less nerves, and there's also a difference between not laughing and having a bad time.
Hmm.
Like if I have like a relatively low key audience, but it looks like they're really enjoying themselves, that's different than like if everyone looks
Yeah, if
furious.
they want to leave or
Yeah,
and when you write, I guess if you write like a certain nerdy joke or a gamer, like something maybe very niche for gamers, would you
yeah.
change it for depending on the audience or?
I mean, sometimes yeah. Usually yeah. Or like I had a joke that I thought about putting in the book, but since I did it in stand up and it had been recorded, it felt weird. But like
Hmm.
about dressing up as video game characters for Halloween as a kid. And I talk about dressing as Simon Belmont, and I literally say Simon Belmont from Castlevania. Don't worry if you don't know what that is. I will explain it. Don't shut off. And then like I explained that I was like, this little kid in the Florida sun wearing like a leather, Simon Belmont outfit. And but like in those instances, I'll literally say like, I'm going to give you all the details you need. Please don't tune out.
Just down, but for sketches and shows when you're writing, would you prefer when someone says like, "We just need any idea," so you can go in your head and just find anything, or if it's like we need something specific or we need something based on this, what do you prefer to write? I guess.
I usually prefer a little guidance. Not because I want to be told exactly what to do, but in my experience, when someone's like, just pitch anything, it often means pitch ideas until I figure out what I want.
Hmm.
And sometimes that can sort of be like, like guessing what's in my pocket in a way, sort of like, whereas if someone's like, hey, we're looking for some material on this news story, does anyone have anything? At least I can be like, okay, I know that they want this. I'm not just sort of blindly firing.
Hmm. Oh, and I guess what are there any games that you're playing right now at the moment?
Yeah, I'm playing Two Point Museum, which has been super
Okay.
fun. I love sim games and I love museums, so it was like made for me.
Hmm.
And I've been playing Avowed, and I'm like 30 hours
Oh,
in.
I was gonna ask you if there's any, oh, if there's any like game genre or specific game that like people love, your friends love, and maybe you've tried or you just know you're not into it, but you wish you were into it. Like I have friends that love Elden Ring and I've tried it like 3 times, but I just
Yeah.
suck at it.
You know what? Like, and this sounds like I'm being like elitist or up my own butt, but like I have trouble with like Call of Duty. And during the pandemic it was hard because all of my friends and
Hmm.
my brother and comedians I knew were like playing it and having a great time. And I would play it just so I could like hang out with these people during the pandemic. But there's something about Call of Duty that just does not speak to me. And I don't mean it makes me feel bad. It's more just like vanilla ice cream to me.
Yeah.
Like, and look, I'm weird that like I also don't love sports games, but if you make it about robots playing baseball, I'll be there.
Hmm.
So, I'm not necessarily like thinking rationally. It just I don't know, there's something about it that has just never quite grabbed me. But I'm also then again not a huge multiplayer person. Like I like co-op games, but I'm not a big shooter guy.
Hmm.
But I always feel bad because I know they're good. And I know my friends love them, and I know I would have a better time with a lot of people that I like if I liked it. It
Yeah.
just does not grab me.
No, I feel that. Like there's even when I was playing Destiny, it was because of my friends, and when I was playing it, I really enjoyed it. Like I was
Yeah,
like, this is beautiful and like really well made. But then when I wasn't playing, I'm like, I don't want to play Destiny. Like
I
I'd
was the
rather
same way
play
with
something
Destiny.
else. But I feel
I
I
was
have
I
games
was
like that.
just like that with Destiny 2. And I have a friend who works at Bungie. Like
Hmm.
I should really like Destiny, but again, it's another game that just did not grab me. Even the way something like Borderlands did, even though they're pretty similar
Hmm. And then
in
has
terms
any,
of gameplay.
yeah, and have any, I guess, has your taste changed? Like maybe there was a genre that you didn't play or didn't like. Like recently, I've been playing more RPGs and stuff. I'm getting into Final Fantasies and all these games that I missed when I was a kid because I was like, oh, that's too complicated for me. But now I like really enjoy it. Anything like
Um,
that?
I think for like a couple of years, I was like hesitant to get into visual novels. I think I like was like, am I just gonna accidentally get like a weird porn one? Am I gonna get the wrong one? And
Yeah.
I had the right friends introduce me to like the right visual novels that I was like, okay, I get it now. And what's weird is I love things like Phoenix Wright, which are kind of essentially visual novels in their own way. But
Hmm.
like I just could not crack the genre that well until relatively recently. But now I like it. Like Slay the Princess, awesome.
Yeah. All right. I was saving Cabernet, the vampire one,
Yeah, yeah,
for
yeah. I got that. I haven't played it yet, but I got
okay.
that.
I was saving it for my trip to visit my friend in Minnesota because I was like, okay, I'll be on a plane for like 4 hours. So then it'll have my full attention because that's my problem with those games, I think, is that I start playing and I'm enjoying it, but I'm like, oh, I could be doing this or like get sidetracked.
Yeah.
But I
Whereas
played
I,
for 2 hours on the plane, like 1 hour there and 1 hour back. Well, I want to keep playing.
but exactly. And I think maybe my problem with Call of Duty is the flip side of that, where I'm like, what's my character's motivation to be on this
Yeah. Those
battlefield?
and you're on your phone the whole time in between games.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm. Um, well, then I wanted to ask because tomorrow, so I'm going to post this after tomorrow, but tomorrow's the Switch 2
hmm
announcement thing. Do you have any crazy predictions?
I mean, it's less of a prediction and more like I'm really hoping we get a new mainline Mario game.
Mhm.
And I will be clear, I know nothing. I
Yeah.
sort of have like a thing with. I have Nintendo friends who are in town right now, and I
Yeah. Have you
had
tried
dinner with one
asking
of them.
people and they're just like, we can't tell you or they don't?
But I even what even with, like the moment I left, I was like, I understand that I can.
Yeah.
If something's announced, I could be like, oh crap, you guys are doing this. But like
Hmm.
until there's details, it's almost like a gentleman's agreement to not ask.
Yeah.
But like I was having dinner with one guy, and literally we sounded like we were like talking in code, like we were in the CIA. Where I was like, "So how's the thing going?" And he's like, "It's pretty busy, but we're excited about it." I was like, "A lot of people here for the thing." Like not actual details about it, but more like me just being polite and asking how his job is going. But
Hmm.
since it's
Yeah,
that
you can't
thing,
ask. It's too
and we're at a
specific.
busy restaurant, it's not like I'd be like, "Hey, how's the Switch 2 doing?"
Hmm.
But so I'm actually getting drinks with some more of them on Thursday, which will be fun.
That's
But
cool.
um, I think I mainline Mario game I really want. Um, I would love there to be a new Animal Crossing.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, it's been longer than we think since Horizons.
Yeah.
It has been over 5 years.
Yeah.
So I would love that, but I don't know if I have any crazy predictions.
Hmm.
I could see, since it looks like that Switch Joy-Con is usable as a
Oh
mouse,
yeah, that could be cool.
I I
Hmm.
I predict that there's going to be like a 1-2 switch type weirdo game
Hmm.
where they're like this shows how everything on the Switch
Yeah,
works.
how the
On
new
the Switch
stuff.
2 works.
Hmm.
And it'll be fun, but none of us will be like that's my favorite. But I don't know, man. I don't know. I mean, the fact that it plays Switch games means like to me it's almost like upgrading a phone a little bit,
Hmm.
but I like that. Like I
Yeah, I'm excited about
I
that
like
because
it.
I have so much. That's what I was thinking at first when they announced them. I'm not ready. I have so many games to finish.
Yeah, but now you can just put them on there, and you're like, oh, good, okay.
Yeah, well, that'd
I
be
don't
cool.
have to worry about playing Sui code in the wrong system.
Yeah. Mm, no, well, I guess that's all I have for you. Um, I want to say thanks, and then
Of course,
I'll
yeah.
just
No,
stop.
thank you for having me.